The most painful kind of heartbreak isn't when they leave. It's when they want an audience to watch them replace you. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers the size of small cars, casting warm golden light across polished marble floors and rows of elegantly dressed guests. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying silver trays filled with champagne, while a string quartet played softly near the grand staircase. Everything about the evening felt expensive, carefully planned, and impossible to ignore. At the center of it all stood Ryan Calloway, smiling as if the world belonged to him. One hand rested comfortably around the waist of his fiancée, Madison Blake. The diamond on her finger sparkled every time she lifted her glass. Laughter followed them wherever they went. Compliments seemed endless. Congratulations echoed from every corner of the room. Tonight was supposed to be the beginning of Ryan's perfect future. But Ryan kept checking the entrance. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward the large double doors at the far end of the ballroom. He tried to hide it. Most people never noticed. Yet he kept looking. Waiting. Anticipating. Almost hoping. Then, exactly 20 minutes after the celebration officially began, the doors opened. The room didn't stop. The music continued. Conversations carried on. Nobody gasped. Nobody whispered. Not yet. Claire Whitmore stepped inside quietly, as though she had accidentally walked into someone else's event. She wore a simple black dress. No dramatic entrance. No expensive jewelry. No attempt to compete with the glamour surrounding her. She carried herself with calm confidence, but she was alone. Completely alone. For a moment, a few guests exchanged glances. Some recognized her immediately. Others only remembered her after hearing her name mentioned years ago. Ryan's ex-wife. The woman who used to stand beside him before everything changed. The woman everyone assumed never fully recovered after the divorce. Ryan noticed her instantly. A slow smile appeared across his face. It was polite enough to avoid criticism, but beneath it sat something colder. Something satisfied. He excused himself from a conversation and guided Madison toward the entrance. Several guests followed with curious eyes. Claire stopped near a tall arrangement of white roses. Her expression never changed. Ryan approached with the confidence of a man convinced he had already won. "Claire," he said warmly. "I'm glad you came." His voice carried just enough volume for nearby guests to hear. Madison offered a practiced smile. "It's so nice to finally meet you." Claire returned the smile politely. "Congratulations to both of you." The words were simple. Respectful. Difficult to criticize. Yet something about her calmness seemed to disappoint Ryan. He had expected discomfort. Maybe sadness. Maybe jealousy. Instead, Claire looked perfectly at ease. As though she had attended a business dinner rather than her ex-husband's engagement party. Ryan quickly recovered. He wrapped an arm around Madison's shoulder and began introducing her to people standing nearby. Stories followed. Their vacations. Their future plans. Their dream wedding venue overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Every sentence seemed carefully selected. Every detail polished. Every compliment directed toward Madison somehow doubled as a reminder that Claire no longer belonged in Ryan's life. Around them, guests smiled politely. Some genuinely admired the couple. Others watched Claire instead. Waiting for a crack in her composure. Waiting for disappointment to appear in her eyes. But Claire simply listened. She thanked servers when they offered drinks. She congratulated old acquaintances on promotions. She smiled at strangers. She never competed for attention. She never defended herself. She never explained anything. Yet the more she remained calm, the stranger the atmosphere became. Because while everyone expected the divorced woman to look broken, Claire looked free. And although nobody understood it yet, the most important person in that ballroom had not arrived. Claire could feel the eyes on her long before anyone spoke to her again. Not because she was making a scene, but because she was not. In a room filled with people competing for attention, her quiet confidence seemed almost out of place. Across the ballroom, Ryan laughed at something one of his business associates said. The sound carried easily through the crowd. Madison stood beside him, smiling as guests admired her engagement ring. Everything appeared perfect. Yet every few minutes, Ryan glanced toward Claire. It was subtle. Almost invisible. But it happened often enough to reveal something he would never admit aloud. Her presence mattered more than he wanted anyone to know. Claire accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and moved toward a large window overlooking the city skyline. Outside, thousands of lights stretched across the darkness like scattered diamonds. 3 years ago, she would have stood beside Ryan at an event like this. 3 years ago, she would have been the woman wearing the ring. The memory arrived unexpectedly. Not as pain. Not as regret. Just a distant reminder of a life that no longer belonged to her. Back then, Ryan had not been the confident man standing in the center of a luxury ballroom. He had been ambitious, determined, and constantly worried about money. They lived in a small apartment barely large enough for 2 people. The kitchen was cramped. The water heater failed every winter. The air conditioning struggled through the summer. Yet somehow they laughed more during those years than anyone in this room was laughing tonight. Claire remembered late evenings spent helping Ryan prepare presentations. She remembered proofreading proposals while eating takeout from cardboard containers. She remembered encouraging him after difficult meetings. Whenever he doubted himself, she believed enough for both of them. Success did not arrive overnight. It came slowly. Promotion after promotion. Opportunity after opportunity. Eventually the apartment became a townhouse. The townhouse became a larger home. The struggles that once brought them together slowly disappeared. But something else disappeared with them. Ryan became busier. More distracted. More concerned with appearances. Conversations grew shorter. Dinners became rare. Weekends became workdays. The distance between them expanded so gradually that neither of them seemed to notice at first. Then one evening everything changed. Claire could still remember the exact sound of the rain tapping against the windows. Ryan sat across from her at the dining room table. A half-finished cup of coffee rested beside him. He stared at the surface as though the words might be easier if he avoided looking directly at her. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded strangely calm. Too calm. He said he was no longer happy. He said they wanted different things. He said their lives were moving in separate directions. Simple sentences. Carefully chosen. Almost rehearsed. Claire had listened quietly. Not because she agreed, but because she understood something in that moment. The man sitting across from her had already left long before that conversation began. By the time the divorce papers were signed, most people assumed Claire would never recover. Friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. Some took Ryan's side. Others simply drifted away. It was easier that way. Tonight, as she stood alone beneath the glow of the ballroom lights, many of those same people were watching her again. They expected sadness. They expected bitterness. They expected to see the woman Ryan left behind. What they did not realize was that the woman Ryan left behind no longer existed. The longer the evening continued, the more uncomfortable the room became. Not because anyone was arguing. Not because anything dramatic had happened. It was because Claire Whitmore refused to play the role everyone had assigned to her. She was supposed to be the tragic ex-wife. The woman quietly comparing herself to the younger fiancé. The woman wondering what went wrong. The woman secretly wishing she could have her old life back. Instead, she stood near the window overlooking the city, speaking with an older couple about their recent trip to Montana. She smiled naturally. She laughed at the right moments. She seemed completely unaffected by the spectacle unfolding around her. That was what confused people. Across the ballroom, Ryan noticed it too. Every attempt to display his happiness seemed to produce the opposite effect. The more he showcased his new life, the less interested Claire appeared. Madison, meanwhile, enjoyed the attention surrounding the engagement. Guests complimented her dress, her ring, and the wedding plans she eagerly described. She was not intentionally cruel. In fact, she seemed genuinely excited about her future. Yet Ryan continued steering conversations in Claire's direction. During one discussion with several executives, he casually mentioned how much his life had improved during the past few years. During another, he joked about learning valuable lessons from failed relationships. The comments sounded harmless on the surface. But everyone understood who he was talking about. Several guests glanced toward Claire after each remark. Waiting. Watching. Hoping for a reaction. They received none. Claire simply sipped her sparkling water and continued her conversation. Her calmness was becoming impossible to ignore. Then a former colleague approached her. His name was David Mercer, someone who had worked alongside Ryan years ago. Claire remembered him immediately. David smiled awkwardly. "It has been a long time," he said. "You look great." Claire thanked him. For a moment, he hesitated. Then curiosity got the better of him. "So what have you been doing these days?" The question sounded innocent enough. But Claire recognized what he really meant. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Had she recovered? Had she moved on? Had she spent 3 years rebuilding her life, or merely surviving it? Claire smiled politely. Working. Traveling a little. Enjoying life. David nodded, though his expression suggested he expected a longer answer. Something more dramatic. Something involving struggle and heartbreak. Instead, Claire offered nothing else. The mystery only deepened. Nearby, Ryan was introducing Madison to another group of guests. One of them suddenly asked a question that caused an awkward pause. "Have you spoken to Claire much over the years?" Ryan laughed lightly before answering. "Not really. People move on." The response sounded confident. Yet several guests noticed he immediately looked toward Claire afterward. As if checking whether she had heard him. She had. But she did not react. The orchestra shifted into a slower piece. Glasses clinked softly. Conversations flowed through the ballroom like background music. Everything appeared normal. Yet beneath the surface, something was changing. People had arrived expecting to celebrate Ryan and Madison. Instead, they found themselves watching Claire. Not because she demanded attention. Because she did not. And sometimes silence is far more powerful than performance. Ryan could still control the room. He could still command attention. He could still tell himself that tonight proved he had won. But for the first time all evening, a quiet uncertainty began settling beneath his confidence. Because the woman standing across the ballroom looked nothing like someone who had lost. And somewhere beyond the walls of the hotel, completely unknown to everyone in attendance, a black luxury sedan was moving steadily through the city toward the celebration. Claire looked out at the city lights while the celebration continued behind her, but her thoughts were no longer in the ballroom. They drifted back to a different version of herself. A version that had stood alone in a nearly empty apartment 3 years earlier, staring at walls that suddenly felt much larger than before. The silence after the divorce had been louder than any argument. Friends she thought would remain close slowly disappeared. Couples stopped inviting her to dinner. Some people did not know what to say. Others simply chose the easier side. For months, every conversation seemed to begin with sympathy and end with awkward silence. At first, Claire believed she needed to rebuild her life immediately. She made lists, set goals, filled notebooks with plans. But grief did not follow schedules. Some mornings she woke up feeling strong. Other mornings, even getting out of bed felt difficult. Then one day something changed. It was not dramatic. There was no life-changing speech. No miracle opportunity. Just sunlight coming through the kitchen window as she drank coffee alone. For the first time in months, she realized she had finished an entire morning without thinking about Ryan. The realization surprised her. It felt small. Yet it became the beginning of everything. Claire stopped measuring her life by what she had lost. Instead, she focused on what remained. She accepted consulting projects that she once would have declined. She traveled for work. She took evening classes to sharpen skills she had neglected during her marriage. Week by week, her confidence returned. Slowly. Quietly. Authentically. While other people imagined she was recovering from heartbreak, Claire was actually discovering freedom. She rented a modest apartment in a new neighborhood. Every Saturday morning she walked to the same corner coffee shop. The owner learned her name. The barista remembered her order. For the first time in years, nobody knew her as someone's wife. She was simply Claire. That mattered more than she expected. Opportunities followed. Some arrived through hard work. Others arrived through relationships she built herself. Clients recommended her to colleagues. Colleagues introduced her to larger projects. The work became challenging. Then rewarding. Then successful. Yet she rarely spoke about it. There was nobody she felt obligated to impress. Meanwhile, Ryan's name occasionally appeared online. Promotions. Awards. Interviews. Photos from charity galas and corporate events. Claire saw them sometimes. She never searched for them. But she never avoided them either. The pictures no longer carried emotional weight. They felt like photographs from someone else's story. Looking back, the most surprising part was not that she survived the divorce. It was that she eventually became grateful for it. Not grateful for the pain. Not grateful for the loneliness. Grateful because it forced her to meet herself again. The version of Claire that emerged afterward was stronger than the one who entered the marriage. More independent. More confident. More at peace. A burst of laughter from across the ballroom pulled her back into the present. Ryan was speaking to another group of guests. Madison stood beside him, smiling brightly. Everything still looked perfect from a distance. Yet Claire noticed something she had not seen earlier. Ryan seemed to be working very hard to maintain that image. Almost as if he needed everyone to believe it. Claire took a slow sip of sparkling water. She no longer felt anger toward him. She no longer felt resentment. The opposite, actually. She felt nothing at all. And sometimes indifference is the clearest sign that a wound has finally healed. Just then, her phone vibrated softly inside her purse. She glanced down at the screen. A single message had appeared. It contained only 4 words. I am almost there. Claire stared at the message for a moment before locking her phone and slipping it back into her purse. A faint smile touched her lips, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Nobody around her noticed. The celebration continued uninterrupted. Glasses clinked. Soft music drifted through the ballroom. Conversations overlapped beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Yet for the first time that evening, Claire felt anticipation. Not nervousness. Not anxiety. Something warmer. Across the room, Ryan was still surrounded by guests. He looked confident. Successful. Admired. Everything he had spent years building was on display tonight. Yet Claire knew something few people understood. The most impressive person she had met after her divorce had never needed a room full of strangers to prove his worth. Her thoughts drifted back nearly 2 years. It had been a rainy Thursday afternoon in Chicago. She had arrived at a coffee shop 15 minutes early for a meeting with a potential client. The weather had been miserable. Wind pushed rain sideways across the sidewalks. Most people hurried indoors without making eye contact. Claire remembered sitting near the window reviewing notes when a stranger approached her table. He held a cup of coffee in one hand and a folder in the other. "I think you accidentally took my seat," he had said. Claire looked up, expecting irritation. Instead she found a smile. Friendly. Relaxed. Amused. She glanced around the nearly empty cafe. Half the tables were available. "Then I owe you an apology," she replied. The stranger laughed. "Not really. I just needed an excuse to start a conversation." Under different circumstances, Claire might have dismissed the comment. But there was something unusual about him. He seemed entirely comfortable with himself. No performance. No arrogance. No need to impress anyone. They spoke for less than 10 minutes before her meeting began. She learned his name was Alexander Sterling. He learned almost nothing about her past. What surprised Claire most was that he never asked. No questions about marriage. No questions about divorce. No curiosity about personal history. Most people wanted explanations. Alexander seemed interested only in who she was at that moment. Weeks later, they crossed paths again at a business conference. Then again during a charity event. The encounters felt coincidental at first. Eventually they stopped being coincidences. Friendship developed naturally. Conversations became longer. Dinners followed. Yet Alexander remained exactly the same person she met in that coffee shop. He listened more than he talked. He remembered details others forgot. He respected boundaries without being asked. Most importantly, he never treated Claire as someone damaged by her past. One evening, nearly 6 months after they met, Claire finally told him about Ryan. She expected questions. Instead, Alexander simply listened. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully and asked a question nobody else had ever asked. "What did you learn about yourself?" Not what Ryan did wrong. Not whether she still missed him. Not whether she wanted revenge. What did she learn about herself? The question stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Because that was the difference. Ryan had spent years focused on achievements, titles, and appearances. Alexander seemed interested in character. Back in the ballroom, Claire glanced toward the entrance. Somewhere beyond those doors, the man who had changed her understanding of relationships was getting closer. She checked the time. Less than 10 minutes had passed since his message arrived. Across the room, Ryan raised his champagne glass for another toast. Guests turned toward him. Laughter followed. Attention shifted once again to the happy couple. Nobody noticed the doorman quietly speaking into an earpiece near the entrance. Nobody noticed the subtle change in posture among several hotel staff members. And nobody realized that the next arrival would change the entire atmosphere of the evening. The text message remained on Claire's mind long after she slipped her phone back into her purse. 4 simple words. Nothing dramatic. Nothing designed to impress. That was exactly how Alexander communicated. He never announced himself. He never demanded attention. Yet somehow people always noticed when he entered a room. Claire looked across the ballroom once more. Ryan was standing near a massive floral arrangement with several senior executives from his company. Madison remained at his side, gracefully accepting compliments and congratulations. To anyone observing from a distance, the evening appeared flawless. Yet Claire had spent enough years around corporate events to recognize what others missed. Ryan was not relaxed. He was performing. Every laugh seemed slightly louder than necessary. Every story lasted slightly longer than it should. Every glance toward the crowd carried the subtle need for approval. The realization no longer saddened her. If anything, it made her grateful for the path her life had taken. 2 years ago, shortly after she and Alexander began spending more time together, he had invited her to attend a small fundraising dinner. Nothing extravagant. Just 40 guests gathered inside a historic Chicago hotel. Claire remembered feeling nervous. Not because of Alexander, but because she was still rebuilding her confidence around unfamiliar social circles. That evening she had worried about saying the wrong thing. Worrying about whether people would judge her. Worrying about being introduced as someone's companion rather than being valued for herself. Alexander noticed almost immediately. During the drive downtown, he asked a question. "What are you worried about?" Claire admitted the truth. She told him she felt out of place. She told him she was still learning how to navigate life after everything that happened. Alexander listened quietly before offering a response she never forgot. The right people do not care where you came from. They care who you are when you arrive. At the time, the words sounded simple. Over the following months, they proved true again and again. Through Alexander, Claire met entrepreneurs, philanthropists, artists, and business leaders. The surprising part was not their success. It was their humility. The people she admired most rarely discussed money. They discussed ideas. They discussed purpose. They discussed how to create opportunities for others. That environment changed her perspective. Success stopped looking like luxury cars and expensive watches. Success became freedom. Freedom to choose where she lived. Freedom to choose who surrounded her. Freedom to wake up every morning without needing anyone's approval. Those lessons eventually led to opportunities she never expected. One consulting project became 2. 2 became 5. Relationships developed. Partnerships followed. Doors opened. Not because someone rescued her, but because she walked through them herself. Alexander simply believed in her before she fully believed in herself. Back in the ballroom, a sudden burst of applause interrupted her thoughts. Ryan had apparently finished another toast. Guests lifted their glasses once more. The orchestra paused briefly before beginning a new piece. Claire smiled politely and joined the applause. She genuinely wished Madison well. The woman had done nothing wrong. She was simply stepping into a story without understanding its full history. Then something unusual happened. Near the entrance, several conversations abruptly slowed. Heads began turning one after another. Not dramatically. Gradually. Like a ripple moving across water. Claire noticed it immediately. The doorman had opened the large entrance doors. Cool evening air drifted briefly into the ballroom. A few hotel staff members straightened their posture. Several guests exchanged curious looks. Whatever had just arrived outside was attracting attention before anyone had even entered. Claire felt her heartbeat quicken slightly. Not from nervousness. From recognition. Without checking her phone, she already knew. He was here. The ballroom did not fall silent all at once. The change happened gradually, table by table, conversation by conversation. A few people near the entrance stopped speaking first. Then several others turned their heads. Within seconds, curiosity spread through the room like a slow-moving wave. Ryan noticed it. Immediately. Midway through a conversation, he glanced toward the entrance, wondering what had captured everyone's attention. Madison followed his gaze. So did the executive standing nearby. The large doors remained open. Beyond them stood a tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He moved with the relaxed confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. No dramatic gestures. No attempt to command attention. Yet attention found him anyway. The hotel manager personally greeted him before stepping aside. Several staff members exchanged quick looks of recognition. A few guests near the entrance straightened almost instinctively. Claire felt warmth spread through her chest. Alexander Sterling had arrived. He scanned the ballroom once. Not searching for approval. Not measuring the crowd. Simply looking for one person. When his eyes found Claire, a genuine smile appeared. The kind that could not be rehearsed. The kind that came from affection rather than performance. Claire smiled back. Across the room, Ryan watched the exchange without understanding it. At first, he assumed Alexander was another guest. Someone important, perhaps. Corporate events often attracted influential people. Yet the reactions surrounding the newcomer seemed unusual. Several business leaders immediately moved toward him. A woman near the entrance whispered something to her husband. The husband looked surprised and quickly adjusted his jacket before approaching. Even the atmosphere felt different. Curious. Alert. Expectant. Alexander shook hands with a few people who greeted him. He exchanged brief words, accepted congratulations for projects Claire knew nothing about, then continued toward her. He never appeared rushed. Never distracted. Every person he encountered received his full attention. That was one of the qualities Claire admired most. Whether speaking to a server or a chief executive officer, Alexander treated people the same way. As he crossed the ballroom, more guests began recognizing him. Conversations lowered. Eyes followed. Phones discreetly appeared in a few hands beneath tables. Ryan noticed all of it. Confusion slowly replaced confidence. "Do you know him?" Madison asked quietly. Ryan frowned. The face seemed familiar. Very familiar. Yet he could not immediately place it. Then one of the executives beside him muttered a name under his breath. Ryan's expression changed instantly. Alexander Sterling. The name landed like a stone in still water. Ryan knew exactly who he was. Almost everyone in his industry did. Articles. Interviews. Investment announcements. Major acquisitions. Alexander rarely sought publicity, yet financial publications discussed him constantly. Over the past decade he had quietly built one of the most influential investment groups in the country. Ryan had read about him countless times. He had even referenced Alexander's business strategies during meetings. Yet he had never expected to see him standing inside this ballroom. More importantly, he had no idea why Alexander was walking directly toward Claire. Guests began noticing the same thing. One by one, heads turned from Alexander to Claire and back again. The connection was becoming impossible to ignore. Claire remained perfectly calm. She did not wave dramatically. She did not rush forward. She simply waited. Alexander finally reached her side. For a brief moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then he smiled warmly and said, "I am sorry I am late." Claire's eyes softened. "You are right on time." And for the first time that evening, Ryan felt something he had not experienced in years. Uncertainty. For several seconds, nobody seemed quite sure how to react. Alexander and Claire stood together near the window overlooking the city while conversations around the ballroom struggled to regain their rhythm. Guests continued speaking, but now every discussion carried the same unspoken question. How did Claire Whitmore know Alexander Sterling? Ryan felt the question more intensely than anyone. He watched from across the room, trying to reconcile two realities that suddenly refused to fit together. In his mind, Claire still belonged to an older version of the story. The woman he left behind. The woman everyone assumed was rebuilding her life in quiet obscurity. Yet the scene unfolding before him suggested something entirely different. Alexander was not treating Claire like an acquaintance. He was not greeting her as a business contact. The warmth between them was unmistakable. Madison noticed it too. They seem close, she said softly. Ryan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on them. Nearby, one of the executives standing with Ryan finally broke the silence. Close, the man said with a nervous laugh. From what I have heard, they have been together for quite a while. Ryan turned toward him. Together? The executive nodded. I thought everyone knew. Ryan felt the air leave his lungs. Around the ballroom, similar conversations were beginning to unfold. People who recognized Alexander were quietly sharing information with those who did not. His reputation preceded him. Major acquisitions. Investment firms. Philanthropic foundations. Technology ventures. Real estate portfolios. The details varied depending on who was speaking, but the conclusion remained the same. Alexander Sterling operated in a world far beyond the reach of most people in attendance. Yet the true surprise was not Alexander himself. It was Claire. Because the more people discussed her connection to him, the more another truth began emerging. Claire had not simply entered Alexander's world. She had built her own place within it. Several guests knew pieces of the story. A woman from New York mentioned Claire's consulting work. An investor from Boston spoke about a strategic partnership she had helped negotiate. Another guest referenced a leadership conference where Claire had delivered a keynote presentation that received national attention. Ryan listened without speaking. Each new detail felt like discovering chapters from a book he never realized existed. 3 years ago, he believed he understood exactly how Claire's future would unfold. Tonight he was learning how little he actually knew. Across the room, Alexander and Claire continued speaking quietly. Neither appeared interested in the attention surrounding them. Then another revelation arrived. It came during a conversation between two senior executives standing only a few feet from Ryan. One of them mentioned an upcoming acquisition. The other immediately recognized the company involved. Ryan recognized it too. His stomach tightened. Because the acquisition directly affected his industry. More specifically, it affected his company. The deal should close within a few months, one executive said. Alexander's group has been leading the investment consortium. The second executive nodded. I heard Claire played a major role in structuring the partnership. Ryan stared at them. Claire. Both men looked surprised. Of course, one replied. She has been one of the key strategic advisors. The word settled heavily into the room around him. Suddenly the evening looked completely different. This was never a story about a wealthy man rescuing an abandoned woman. Claire had not been waiting for someone to change her life. She had changed it herself. Alexander had recognized her value long before anyone else in this ballroom bothered to notice it. And as that realization spread through the crowd, something remarkable happened. People stopped looking at Claire as Ryan's ex-wife. They started looking at Ryan as Claire's past. The evening continued, but the balance of the room had permanently shifted. Conversations that once revolved around Ryan and Madison now drifted toward Claire and Alexander. Nobody announced the change. Nobody needed to. It happened naturally. The way truth often does when it finally becomes visible. Ryan stood quietly near one of the reception tables, holding a glass he had barely touched. Around him, guests continued smiling and socializing, yet he could no longer ignore what he had learned. For years, he had told himself a story. A simple story. He had moved forward. Claire had been left behind. Success had validated his choices. Tonight that story had quietly fallen apart. Not because Claire argued with him. Not because she tried to embarrass him. In fact, she had done the opposite. She had shown him nothing except grace. Across the ballroom, Alexander was speaking with several guests who had approached him. Claire stood beside him comfortably. She did not seem impressed by his reputation. She did not seek attention through his success. She simply looked happy. That detail affected Ryan more than anything else. Happiness. Real happiness. Not the kind performed for an audience. Not the kind measured by applause, titles, or expensive venues. The kind that appears when someone is finally at peace with themselves. After a moment, Claire excused herself from a conversation and began walking across the ballroom. Several guests greeted her along the way. Some who had barely acknowledged her earlier were suddenly eager to speak. Claire treated them exactly as she had before. Polite. Warm. Unchanged. Eventually she found herself standing only a few feet from Ryan and Madison. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. The noise of the party seemed distant. Madison broke the silence first. Her smile was sincere. "It was nice meeting you tonight," she said. Claire returned the smile. "You too. Congratulations. I wish you both the best." There was no bitterness in her voice. No hidden meaning. Just honesty. Madison thanked her. Then she stepped aside to greet another guest. Ryan and Claire were left standing together for the first time all evening. Ryan looked at her carefully. Perhaps more carefully than he had in years. The confidence he carried earlier was gone. In its place sat something quieter. Reflection. Regret. Understanding. "You seem happy," he finally said. Claire considered the words before answering. "I am." The simplicity of her response made it impossible to challenge. Ryan nodded slowly. His eyes drifted toward Alexander for a moment before returning to her. "I did not expect any of this." Claire smiled gently. "Neither did I." Another silence followed. Yet this one felt different. Not uncomfortable. Just final. The kind of silence that arrives when there is nothing left to prove. Ryan lowered his gaze briefly and then looked back up. For the first time that evening, he appeared completely honest. "I underestimated you." Claire studied him for a second before responding. "No, Ryan. You just stopped seeing me." The words were not cruel. They were not meant to wound. That was what made them powerful. Because they were true. Across the ballroom, Alexander approached with his usual calm smile. Claire slipped her hand into his. Not as a statement. Not as a victory. Simply. Because it felt natural. Together they headed toward the exit. No dramatic farewell. No triumphant speech. No need for one. As the doors opened and the cool night air greeted them, Claire took one last glance at the ballroom behind her. 3 years earlier, she had walked away from that chapter believing she had lost everything. Tonight she finally understood what had really happened. She had not lost her future. She had found it. And as she stepped into the night beside the man who respected her for exactly who she was, the only thing left behind was the version of herself that once believed her worth depended on someone else's choice. She did not win him back. She won herself.